So welcome to this episode of the HRD Talks podcast, where we talk with HR directors and people directors about their journey into HR. We get their insight into current trends in the world of work and take their advice on the future of HR and how HR professionals can deliver value and progress their career. I'm Nick Elliott, employment lawyer, and I'm really excited that we have a first for the podcast, which is two guests, both at the same time, both from businesses that are fast-growing SMEs, that our guests are heading up their respective people functions and doing some really exciting stuff. So we have Charlotte Coore, who's the head of people and culture at 200 Degrees Coffee. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you.
And Zoë Ogden, who's the people director at Impression, the digital marketing agency. Welcome, Zoë.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, do you guys want to just fill our listeners in on what you guys do within those organisations and a little bit about your organisations? Perhaps, Charlotte, if we go with 200 Degrees first.
Yeah. So, in my role as head of people and culture, I basically shape up the whole HR department. So I help with all areas such as recruitment, onboarding, succession planning, talent management, helping line managers, helping employees. I mean, the list can go on, can't it? But yeah, I'm there to basically care for the employees and make a happy workplace, hopefully.
Brilliant. And tell us what 200 Degrees Coffee do. I guess some of it's in the name.
Yeah, we serve coffee. We also roast the coffee at the headquarters in Nottingham, and we also have barista schools. So it's a really fun area where people can come and learn their latte art skills. I'm still trying to do a decent latte art. I was impressed the other day. I made a little heart. So that was like my first, coffee achievement. We also do like coffee to wholesale clients, and we also do like online subscriptions as well.
Yeah. And you guys are not just in Nottingham.
No.
In fact, you've been massively, rapidly growing over the country.
Yeah. So we are now on 18 coffee shops, and we are continuing to grow as well through this year. So it's very exciting.
So Zoë, tell us a bit about Impression.
Yeah, so we're a digital marketing agency. So we do a range of different services for a number of different clients across so many different sectors. So services like digital PR, SEO, paid media, programmatic, CRO, just the kind of everything all-encompassing digital marketing. And it's great we get to work with like a lot of different kinds of businesses, which is really exciting for our people. And we're about 110 people at the moment, split across Nottingham and London.
Yep.
And then my role is to sit on the leadership team and help drive the vision, direction and strategy of everything people. And I'm quite fortunate that in that business, like one of our main objectives in our 5-year plan is people. So it has to happen. Yeah. So that's like my sole focus. And I'm also lucky enough that I have 2 people in my team as well. So probably do less of the like line managery type stuff now, which is great. So that's evolved over the last 2 years whilst I've worked there, which has been great.
Fantastic. I think part of what we do with the podcast is understand people's career journey a little bit in terms of how they got into HR, how they got to the role that they're in now. So do you want to kick us off with how you kind of decided on a career in HR and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, definitely. I'll try and keep it short and sweet. But I had a part-time job whilst I was at university working for Miss Selfridge, if you remember. What that was. And whilst a lot of my colleagues who were working there, also part-time, were interested in the visual merchandising side and all of the kind of more fashiony side, I just really, really enjoyed when we had like interviews or like delivering the training stuff. And I realised that the people side was something that I really cared about. Although my degree was completely unrelated. I did history and English literature, but you have a lot of transferable skills. And I ended up doing some work experience at the end of my second year at Boots head office. And really enjoyed it. It was a really great way to experience what actually working in HR might be like, just shadowing some people. And I was very fortunate that they did actually pay me for some of that, which was great as well. So they really didn't take advantage, which again kind of speaks a lot to like values and the right kinds of employers. And there were bits in there where I thought I really don't want to do that, like no offense, but like reward and stuff like that. It's not interesting to me. But it helped me realise actually this is what I want to do. And I was fortunate enough that I kept in contact with some people, and I ended up doing, when I finished uni, a maternity cover at their factory. And yeah, I mean, it was a great foot in the door to get into Boots. So I was there for a little while, probably about 3 years. But I'd moved over to the head office side by then. Quickly realised factory life is not for me, which I'm sure we can discuss later.
Quite different to an agency.
Yeah, very different. And then from Boots, I ended up working in Australia actually for a year because I worked on the international side at Boots and I loved all of that kind of side of stuff. And I was just like, I have to go and work internationally myself because it's really interesting. And just because I had family out there, I just chose there because at least we had like support and stuff. So yeah, I was out there. And then when I came back, initially I thought I wanted to do a learning and development role. And again, it's good to test these things out because I did that role for 9 months and realised, no, generalist is for me. And then went into an SME at uni days and was there for 3 years. And that was a real baptism of fire in terms of my HR career. And once I was kind of, I suppose, exhausted from that experience, went back into the larger business. So I was at Mars and loved it. And again, we can talk about the pros and cons of both because there's some amazing parts of that. But again, I got that little real urge to be like, not sure this is the right environment for me. So went back into SME, which was impression. So that's where I am now.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Charlotte?
Yeah, so I've been in HR for around 13 years now. So it's kind of similar. I was at university. I did business management degree and I just loved the idea of kind of supporting business, helping business and going through that transformational side as well. And then as soon as I finished my degree, I got an agency job at Nottingham Trent University in HR. That was only a temporary one kind of through the summer. And then the permanent position for Nottingham Trent University in town came up. There was 200 people that applied for it. And I think because I had the agency work at the Clifton site, they put in a good word for the town centre site. So I would always say if someone's starting off, in HR and in that space, then I think it's quite good to do sort of temporary work, any work that you can do just to kind of develop your skills a little bit more if you are struggling. And then in Nottingham Trent University, I worked again across learning and development and equality and diversity. I was very similar to Zoe that I liked the idea of being a HR generalist and focusing on all different areas rather than that sort of specialised area. I was also, I think throughout my career, I've tried to be quite ambitious and just wanting to kind of create things and add my own value in. So I realised that after 3 years there, I wanted to do something a little bit more advanced. Went on to be a HR advisor at Steris, which is kind of dealing with medical devices and sort of laundry support as well for like the scrubs and stuff in operations. And that was fantastic because I was in a team of about 10 regional advisors there. So it felt like a club, and sometimes that's the thing in HR, you kind of feel a bit sort of segregated. And, so it was really nice to have all the HR people to bounce off. My HR manager was absolutely lovely as well, and she was a great support through that time. And then I got to that stage again where I was starting to get itchy feet, and I was like, okay, I want to progress a little bit more, as you do through your 20s. So then it kind of came about kind of naturally, but I applied for this job as a HR business partner, which was just me and the CEO at the time. So it was a complete startup. And then we grew the company called Growth Partners together. And there was also another company which we dealt with as well on sort of buying companies. So what Growth Partners did was, if you was an SME, you didn't have the right money for a whole permanent HR person, we would offer the services of payroll, pensions, employment law services. And then we kind of grew the business central other business through acquiring businesses. So that was a great learning lesson for me to learn from complete startup, creating that culture, creating the values, working quickly, rapid expansion, a lot of changes. And then just before COVID, I decided to get a new job as head of people and culture. Again, in town, a company called Charlotte Molecular, and I had my interview, and just before, literally the week before or so, COVID hit, we were joking and saying, do we give each other a handshake or not, because there's this virus going round. And then I got the job, started on the first day of COVID. That was announced by the government. So it literally had my got home at 5, had my laptop, met the managing director, got home, and then Boris Johnson announced we're going into lockdown. So that was one of the most interesting first days I've ever had. And that was, again, it was great to work with really intelligent scientists, and, you know, it's a completely fascinating world, which I knew not a lot about before. So again, I think it's been nice to have varied sort of industries and markets and different sort of types of companies, which we'll touch on as well. And then obviously it's the present role today. So yeah, it's been an interesting and varied life, and really enjoyed going from all those roles. And it just shows that hard work does pay off when you start, you know, when I started at Growth Partners, I was a HR business partner, ended as a HR director. And, you know, it's nice to show when people value you and care for you. Yeah,
absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you both. I think, Zoe, you touched on it briefly in terms of that difference between SME and kind of bigger corporate. That's a world that I came from as well, you know, bigger global law firm down to a smaller business working with SMEs. And I always think of it, when you're advising those kind of businesses, I described it as you can get your arms around it a bit more. It's almost like you get to know the people who are really running it, and, you know, you're not a cog in a big machine or a number or however people describe it. What would your kind of experience of that be? What do you see as the differences or the advantages of each, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on your own personal values a lot of the time. And I think we're probably quite similar in that we want to make impact, and it's very hard to make impact when you are like one of a 200 strong HR team.
Yeah.
And how do you like get your ideas out there? And there's so many different layers that you have to get approval from before you can actually sign the thing off. And it's just not pacey and all of that kind of side of things. And that's a bit that didn't appeal to me, particularly because I moved from uni days where I led the whole thing, and it was like pretty much like my own to deal with autonomously, to then go back into something where I felt like I had not as much control.
Yeah.
It was quite difficult, but then on the flip side, and I was very similar to you, I'd started that job in Jan 2020. So then I only had like a month and a half where it was kind of normal before going into this pandemic. But the way that they looked after everybody during that pandemic, and, you know, they had staff who had to go in because that's obviously the nature of the work, but it's such that kind of, like, they just had the resources to be able to support people in a completely different way. And they were so well equipped, you know, they had that whole like business risk strategy people, you know, like they just had everything at their fingertips to be able to support people. And I think as well, there's just so much that you can learn by observing people in those environments. And if that's the right place for you and you're really comfortable and happy in what you're doing, you know, they always tend to pay well and look after people, and, you know, it's nice benefits and all those kinds of things. But I think for me personally, I've seen more growth. Like I often wonder, and it's no disrespect to any of my previous companies, but if I had stayed like in a role, would I be where I am now if I hadn't have changed to something that was a bit more like standalone and completely like have to start from scratch again? Probably not. And I don't think I would have this level of experience that I've got now after like 11 years or whatever. So I think there's a lot to be said, but it's hard work. So that's the thing. It's not like an easy ride going to an SME, as you know. It's so hard, and you have to be so resilient. And I think that's why maybe it's about character and about your values.
Definitely.
Charlotte, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I think without sort of going too much into disadvantages, I think it for me, the larger company you work, the more that companies just see you as a number rather than a person, and you kind of get missed along the way unless you're exceptionally performing well or if you're exceptionally not performing well. So it can be hard, as Zoe mentioned, to kind of have those shadowing and, you know, training opportunities, people to work with you, and the genuine care as well from an employer. I like the family feel sort of cultures, and I know that when companies do grow a lot, it can be hard to keep that. You know, I think we're quite like that here at 200 Degrees. We still very much have a family feel, but we are growing, so we're learning to adapt. And I think that it's very important to kind of assess what you want as well, and where you are in your journey is also quite pivotal in choosing an SME or a large company. And we're going to touch on it as well, but cost of living, money, and, you know, the larger companies do tend to pay a bit more. And again, we'll touch on it, but they do have more of transparent pay bandings as well where you work.
Probably more stability as well.
Definitely. But no, I 100% agree that if you're standalone in HR, it can be really, really difficult to do everything at once. And especially when you're the only person, it can just seem like you kind of get pulled from pillar to post. And especially if you're on a senior management team or a leadership team, everyone will have different opinions and people have a perception of HR. So I think it's quite important to hold your own, as you said, you know, and be true to who you are. I talk a lot about being your authentic self. I feel like you can do that more at an SME than a larger company.
Yeah, I completely agree. As you were talking, I actually reflected on the fact that when I've worked in a larger business, I felt like I've had to somehow change to fit in there, because it is quite a lot about like who you get in front of, who you know, like who's the people that you need to influence, who are the decision makers. And then it feels like you're sort of like schmoozing, and I am not a schmoozer, like naturally. and I observed other people like really schmoozing. Some people are so good at it. Yeah. But then I would think in my head, you're actually not very good.
But I think I'm too nice. And then people don't take me as seriously.
Okay.
Because I'm like,
say, do you feel like you can, but in your role now, do you feel like you can just be yourself and it's easier to be yourself? Yeah. And do things like in the way that you'd want to do it and think about that rather than trying to be conditioned into like, well, this is how the business wants me to do it, so I have to. Whereas I feel like you get more of like a sense of, like I can make this change and it feels good. But I know what you mean. Yeah. Like I think you get swept up in like, kind of like people pleasing and a bit of like because there's like an equilibrium there that you feel like you have to be a part of somehow, and you can't sort of push back as much. And
100%. And obviously it's International Women's Day, so I'll touch on the fact that as a young, I still hope I'm kind of young.
Definitely.
As a young-ish woman, it's so difficult sometimes being on a senior management team because obviously majority of the senior managers are male, and then that's the other kind of elephant in the room, you know, a bit of a hurdle that we have to come across is how do we get that value and most importantly that credibility. And that's where I feel like we have to work harder sometimes to kind of get our foot through the door and have that respect rather than it just given straight away like it could be for some of the male senior members.
And that's one of the challenges that a lot of HR people that I talk to kind of report, which is that space at the top table, you know, on that senior management team. And obviously, I think I was looking today, in fact, the HR profession is 70+% female. How do you guys perceive that? You know, is it easy to get access to that top table or not?
I think times are changing. So it's easier now, but it's more of the fact of our companies doing it because they know that they have to, and it's good for social media and it's good for the LinkedIn posts and to show that they are like that, or do they truly value HR and people? Yeah. And that's a lot of, you know, I was having a discussion with my HR colleague earlier, my HR friend that I know, and she was saying that, you know, it's quite difficult sometimes to be in a company that doesn't truly buy into people, but they know that's what they have to do. So then it makes her job harder.
I think I'm actually in a bit of a unicorn situation where I am the only female on my leadership team at the moment, but I never think about that. They all treat me with so much respect and they all want my opinion on everything as much as I want their opinion on my things as well. And it's so mutual, but that is not the norm. And I do have to remind myself that I've not always had that. And it has been a case of like you'd put something on the agenda for like a senior management team meeting and your thing is the thing that gets bumped because we need to talk about all these other things. And you're sat there thinking the stuff that you're talking about could be solved if you address the people concerns, like the reasons we're not hitting the numbers, and it all links back, but it was never seen as like a valuable contribution. Or having phrases such as you're not a profit driving area of the business. That's like so condescending and undermining of everything that we do, but that's the type of language that sometimes comes out or that people think is the case, and it's just not. I think there maybe was a shift during the pandemic because I think people realised that they really needed HR in that moment in time. So at least there was that, but it should be more that it's seen as a partner and not just as like, I don't know, somebody to come and mop up after you made a mistake. It should never be that. But I think my situation at the moment, I honestly like thank myself every day that that is the case, because I have had it the opposite side and it just feels so demoralising. Or the other side, like you said, where they're saying yes, but they don't really believe in it, and therefore like that's not going to actually drive the change that you're looking for, because it's just tokenism, and that's maybe even worse actually. Like getting people a bit fake about it.
Definitely. I think I've grown to a space where now, I mean, my management team here are absolutely amazing, which is why I'm so happy in my workplace, but I've grown to the stage now where I have to value what I do more than the opinion of others. So, but when I was in the past 3 jobs that I've been doing, I've kind of started the HR function from scratch. And when you can see the progress as a HR professional, and you can see the value that you've added, and you get employees coming to you and saying, "Oh, I'm really glad that you've helped me with this." That's what kind of keeps me fulfilled as well. So I think it's really important that females do kind of take pride in having that soft emotional side that we naturally have 99%. Because I think HR used to be a place where they would just sit in the room, look at a policy book, give their decisions on things, not adding the value, not supporting the numbers. At the end of the day, a business is about numbers, but HR can do so much to support the profits in the business. And if we when things aren't followed, that's when there become serious consequences for the business. So it's important that you do have that person. The senior management team have someone that they feel confident and that they can rely on and speak confidentially to. But I think it's important that everybody kind of looks after each other in the senior management teams.
No, brilliant. Thanks for that. Guys, really good insight, I think, into that area. You have mentioned COVID and the pandemic. I don't think I've done a podcast episode yet where it hasn't come up, and we'll try and stop talking about it at some point. But clearly that changed the world of work generally in quite significant ways. We were talking earlier about also the generational shift in terms of the way that people view work. I think some of it probably is as a result of the pandemic, and we've all viewed work slightly differently, I think, since then. But there's a definite generational thing. Zoe, do you want to just chat to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure that the next couple of years of generations will look at us and think, hang on, you used to commute in rush hour traffic 5 days a week. Like, what? Because it is just crazy to think that was acceptable and that was okay. And the amount of flexibility that we all now have is like just amazing. It's so value add to your life and well-being and all of that kind of stuff. But I think it definitely is interesting to think that there will be a time where people can't really remember a time before, because that's the new workforce, and all of these amazing things that maybe like our generation have really fought for to get in place are now just a standard thing. And if you don't have those things, then you're going to be left behind, because the next generation are going to expect those things, and will ask and will demand it. And in many ways, I think that's a brilliant trait of the next generation to come, because they're not just going to accept like tokenism answers. They're not just going to accept things that you might say as a business owner. They will still challenge you regardless of your position. And I've been in quite a few interviews where at the end where you say, got any questions for us? And, usually the questions are a bit like, oh, what are people like or whatever. But they ask like, what are you doing about XYZ issue? I've seen that you look at this and this and this, and I'm going to ask you a question specifically on it because I'm passionate about it. I just think like, yeah, this is brilliant. Even if it's caught me out slightly and I think, oh, I wasn't prepared for this question, but amazing. Yeah, you should ask that, because it's really important that you do vet the business that you're going to work for. Yeah. But I think it also has changed the kind of, maybe, and this is maybe an old school approach, but that whole like expectation of what work is there for. And, I sort of see it as it creates like this whole holistic view of a person. You build so many skills outside of just the technical skills of your job. And I do sometimes wonder if maybe because everyone has it so good in many ways, like some of those skills might get a bit lost, particularly for people who are in like fully remote roles. It's great impression that generation who are like in their first job, a lot of them come into the office all the time and are making friends and do have people that they can shadow, which is wonderful. But I know that there definitely would be like a lot of people out there who are just still in their parents' spare bedroom, not ever meeting their team. And how demoralising must that be? Because I've made loads of friends in my 20s from people who I worked with, who I'm still friends with now. And I just think it's such an important time in like your emotional development when you're like first in your career, and to not have the same type of environment that's then like cultivating a rounded person. I don't know, it'll be interesting to see like how that next generation evolves, because they'll be our next generation of line managers, for example. There's probably a lot of pros and cons to their experiences.
And are you doing anything to address that within your workforce?
So we do make sure that there's a lot of regular touch points for people, because I think it probably is quite easy for people to become quite insular if you're not saying like you must be in the office XYZ. And we don't really have that, but we do say for certain things you must come in, and we always have a quarterly update where everyone is mandatory, you have to come in, and there's always a social thing. But there's loads of different like social channels. We have like What's for Dinner, where people share like recipes and literally pictures of their dinner. There's Formula One chat, there's Racket Club, there's football, there's like the Heavy Metal Appreciation Society. There's like loads of different types of things. We have game nights, people play badminton, people do climbing. Like there's just loads of stuff that keeps people still engaged, even if you're not physically together. And that's so important. And there's loads of banter, there's loads of chatter. So you sort of do get to know people. And then obviously because we are definitely going to meet every quarter, you recognise names, you start to bring that together. And I think it is really important, particularly for people who maybe are quite introverted in their first job. It must be like really nerve-wracking turning up at that office by yourself. So we always say that someone will come meet you off the train or meet you downstairs. You don't have to come up by yourself. We always have name badges on and all that kind of stuff. So just to create that environment where it's a safe space, but it's so important to actually have those touch points and those connections, because it is just, you know, it's your formative years. I think it's just so important to make sure that you are seeing people and having these opportunities to expand your horizons as a full human, not just in the workplace.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And that, I guess, is in a business where, in theory, I'm guessing the majority of your people could work fully remotely.
Yeah, pretty much, actually.
Whereas in contrast, the people serving the coffee, that's trickier. So how do you approach flexibility?
I think it depends on your routines. And with the COVID times, the coffee shops weren't open. So, you know, it's not like they've been used to being working from home and then all of a sudden everyone's got to come in.
Yeah.
I think one of the pressing things for everybody during COVID was mental health. And, you know, so many people are isolated. And I think so many people towards the end of COVID, people felt more confident to speak up and say, actually, I need help. You know, I'm not in a good place. And that's when, especially when people were not working, it was important to have those touch points, to have someone there and to show them that they care. I mean, I love people watching. So, you know, that's one of the big things for me why I'm in HR, is because I do like people. I like people's behaviours. And I think going through COVID, we've seen such a transformation and a change of human nature and how we approach things differently. And I think it's a really interesting thing that we should all be there for each other and, you know, really show that care and support. It is something that I think, being in HR, you do have to have a caring side to you. And also from a sort of a younger perspective, when we're speaking about that, I remember when I was at Nottingham Trent University and I told my dad I was thinking to go and to do something and progress, and he was straight away saying, oh no, you know, they've got a great brand, a great reputation, do you really want to take a risk on something that might not have the same sort of reputation? And I think younger people are getting so much more confident to take those risks. And the older generation, you know, obviously we know about employee retention and turnover. It's just increasing and increasing through the years. So I think for us, and at 200 Degrees, we like to give people, whether it be a supplier, whether it be a customer, employee, an experience to remember. And I think it's important that throughout that time of their journey, they can go, actually, do you know what? I had a good time there. I felt supported. I had fun. You know, they did everything they could for us as an SME, and really leave with a good impression, because people can't remember what you said to them. It's more how they felt after having that interaction. And I think, again, that can differ for, you know, larger companies. Is I think with SMEs, you can work a lot more on the employee journey and the different touch points and really get to the nitty gritty of why employees feel like that way. Whereas if you work in a larger company, sometimes it's quite harder to really understand the needs of employees and what they want, what they're looking for. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot for businesses in general still to do with the younger age as well, and, you know, getting them out to do more volunteering. We work with a company called Switch Up, who are a charity, and they help with troubled youths and a range of different people, and giving those people opportunities, because not everyone's as fortunate to go to uni. And the costs have gone up 3 times since I went to uni. So would I go to uni now? No, I wouldn't. Unless I was wanting to do law or be a doctor, I wouldn't choose to go to university. So now it's so much harder. The job market's so much harder. I remember when I was applying for all the graduate jobs and just not having much luck being in Nottingham, and really struggling and going, oh, if I move I have to pay more costs for accommodation. So there's so much as a young person for them to think about as their career, and so much in life changes from your 20s to 30s. So having children, and then having that kind of pressure on your career. Do you want to have a child, or do you want to do well in your job? And companies are only just starting to get adjusted with that, and in giving them the right benefits and the well-deserved benefits. But again, there's still so much to do as businesses and the government. But that's a whole different subject.
It's a different podcast.
But I think the most important thing for young people is to have that positive influence, and for them to really be like, yeah, do you know what? I've really enjoyed my time working here. It's, even if it is their time to move on, they had a great experience, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so you were talking about, we've touched on retention and recruitment. You were talking about the challenges of being an SME in a market where your people are very attractive to bigger corporates. And you guys have an interesting approach to that, which I liked.
Yeah, so exactly that. Like, it's about your legacy and how you want people to look back on the time that they spent at your business and still be an ambassador for your business even after they've left, if that is the case. And if they make the choice that they need to move on, then that's fine. But one of the things that we really want to do for retention is to just be really transparent and clear with everyone, so that they can weigh up their options, really. And I think that's the fairest thing that we could do for our people. And I don't know why others wouldn't want to do it, because it's definitely got so many benefits. I mean, there's nothing that's under the table that we can pull out at the end. Okay, maybe that sometimes does shoot us in the foot a little bit because we haven't got that flexibility. But we have all of our salary bands completely transparent, and the way it works, it's not like a flexible band where you're doing the same job as the person, but they could be on 24 and you're on 27. We have stages, you've got 3 sub-levels within the band and quite clear descriptors of what you have to be achieving at each sub-level. So it's almost like a progression route. So it's not just the salary increases, it's also you'll be learning these skills alongside it. And that's right the way up to the top. So we have that from the first entry-level role right the way to our departmental heads. And I just think that helps people understand the journey and the possibilities that they could have if they stayed at Impression, but also the fact that we're invested in wanting to make them, again, a well-rounded individual. They'll learn all these things if they're with us. And that sense of community and that sense of people care, I think as well, that makes people question, do I want to leave that when it's so nice and it's so good? And that's not like that everywhere. So I think there is a lot to do with culture of why people stay. Of course, if you get offered a mad salary, then you're most likely going to take it, because why wouldn't you? And if that happens, we're good luck, have a great time. But if that person at that new company can then one day maybe get Impression to do the digital marketing for that company, that's a really nice full circle moment. And there have been situations where we've had that actually, where people have talked to other people about, oh, do you know anyone? And then they've gone, oh, I used to work at, and then they put us in touch, then we've won work. So there's so many benefits to trying to retain, I suppose, as much as you can, but also when it's the right time for someone to go, them still having that really lovely view of your business.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think the thing is as well, the more that you go for the option that pays a higher amount, especially if it's a jump, you just have to understand that you could be taking on more stress, more responsibilities, and I think you have to kind of weigh it up. Is it worth it? Is it, like you said, is the grass really greener on the other side? Because especially with all the mental health and wellbeing going on at the moment, you might actually be thrown in the deep end, and then you're like, okay, how do I deal with this? Especially if you went from, again, like Zoe and I's sort of journey, being in standalone, things like that. That's quite a lot when I look back and think about some of the experiences that I went through during my 20s. I'm like, oh, don't know how I did it, which is obviously I'm proud of it, but I could have easily gone the other side, and my mental health could have easily been affected by it. So I think you have to weigh things up, the best you can. And whatever happens, things are always a lesson anyway, lesson learned. So even if it's not the best experience or the best experience, sometimes you just have to think about what the best thing is. But you have a gut feeling as well with these things, I think. So when you need to make the move, don't you? Brilliant.
We don't have a sponsor for the podcast. Maybe one day, who knows? But we do have something called the supplier shout out. And that's where I ask our guest or guests to basically give a little shout out for a third party that either you've worked with or has helped your business with something, and just give them a bit of kudos. So Zoe, do you want to kick off with yours?
Yeah, so again, going back to that whole holistic approach of wellbeing at work, something that we found has really supported our business is that our employees have access to a platform called Hello Self, which is where they can log onto the platform. It's completely anonymous, so I don't get a report of who's had a session. I just see how many have been used, and all of the sessions and the dates and times are there, and you can just book one on for yourself, and they're with a clinical psychologist who obviously can support you, can refer as well if needs be. And we've noticed that just having access to that, like even the notion that you could make an appointment with Hello Self has been amazing for people. But then when they've actually needed Hello Self, the benefit that they've had from that, rather than like having to go to their GP and maybe that being a barrier to some people and all that kind of stuff, like because it's instant, it's almost like there's no excuse not to, really. And we talk about it a lot, and people who use the system talk about it a lot as well, which is great from all levels of the business. It's not taboo subject whatsoever, and we've gotten to know the clinical psychologists who operate it, which is amazing. So we sort of know them as humans, and it's not some kind of like EAP, like, use EAP. It's like, have a session with Dr. Emma and she will be able to support you with that. And that's just done wonders for us. And I would really recommend having access to a service like that is feeling more like an extension of your wellbeing offering internally, rather than it being some kind of like add-on system through your private medical or whatever, where it feels anonymous and doesn't feel as comforting. So I would say Hello Self have been brilliant, and they've been so flexible as well when we've needed them for extra things.
Sounds great. Charlotte?
I would say probably Switch Up. So like I said, they are absolutely amazing. They do so much work, in a local area as well, which I think is important to kind of support the local charities. We do all sorts of fundraising with them and for them. And I really think that they're a great bunch of people, and they do help really a lot of people. So I think that's the most important thing, that, again, giving people the opportunities, giving them support, giving them that mentoring. And especially there's people that have been to prison because they weren't given the right opportunities, and then working with Switch Up, they've now gone to got a coffee qualification on helping with their barista skills, or even like working in producing the coffee and giving that charity and the exchange that we have with them. So I think they're absolutely fantastic.
And you guys launched a coffee with them, Switch Up Coffee?
Yes.
Is that still available to buy?
Yes, it is.
We could advertise that too.
Definitely. I definitely recommend go to any 200 Degrees coffee shop.
Brilliant. But check out that on the website as well. I think you can order online, can't you, for the Switch Up Coffee and any other 200 Degrees products that you might be interested in.
Yeah, no, great. Honestly, we've just launched our coffee pods as well. So it's we're adding more and more and more to our products and our services here.
Cool. So just to finish off, I think we're coming into land fairly shortly. We've kind of we have talked a lot about your journeys in HR and how you started out and how things have developed and the challenges around being an SME versus big corporate, that kind of thing. If you were starting again and you were to say to yourself, a career in HR might be interesting, here's some advice, what would you say? Zoe, do you want to?
Great question. The immediate thing that sprung to mind then when you were talking was that I think it's hard, and we've just talked earlier about you want to people please a bit and make sure that people are happy, and you obviously go into HR because you care about people. But I would love to go back and say you won't please everyone, and not everyone is going to like you, and you have to accept that. And that is a really hard thing when you always generally get on with everyone and you think you're a nice person, but you are going to be the bad guy in a lot of people's narratives. And that is something that I've had to learn with a lot of resilience, and a lot of the time you become the face of decisions that people aren't happy about. What I would say on that as well is that I guess as well, I've learned that you're not there for the employee, you're not there for the business either. You are there to try and be the middle ground. And if something doesn't feel ethical, you shouldn't do it, even if all of the directors are telling you should. Like, get rid of that person, blah, 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 like that kind of stuff. Like that, if it doesn't feel right and you don't think they're following the process, you don't have to do it. And on the other side, you're not there to be someone's counsellor. And over the years, especially early career, I would literally have people just moan and moan and moan at me. And then I'd feel bad because I'm like, oh, well, I should listen to their problem. And now, as awful as it is, I'm a lot more direct about it. And I basically say, what do you want the outcome to be?
Yeah.
How do you want me to facilitate this conversation? Like, I'm a lot like stronger and stricter on it. And that ultimately helps them, actually, because they have to think about it. And then the solution is in their hands. And it's basically just coaching them to do it rather than like you having to take on their load as well.
That like 99% of the time, what they're stressed about in that moment, they'll be forgotten about by tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
So they've spent like an hour or something talking to you
Of your
about
time.
it.
Yeah,
And then it'll be like, oh,
absolutely.
actually, I'm fine. The next time you see them.
Yeah, and then they don't even follow up with you either.
No.
It's completely just forgotten about. And then you're sat there wondering, like, I wonder what happened with that conversation. So that whole piece around, like, you're not there to be everyone's best friend, therapist, counsellor. Like, you can have your own boundaries. You can say no. And I guess going back to that early career thing where maybe we probably had a lot of, like, insane experiences and we're working ridiculous hours and all that kind of stuff, like if it does tip into that point where your mental health is starting to like really suffer from that, even though you maybe are advancing quicker than your peers, like that's not worth it. It's just definitely not worth it. And like I said, probably at the end of me being in like my last SME like directorship role, I really was mentally exhausted. And I didn't realise how much that actually impacted my confidence. And it's no disrespect to the company at all. I had a great time there and there's a lot of people there who I still am in contact with, but it's just the nature of that position and what they were doing at the time. I didn't realise how much it was actually really, really impacting me. And then when I went somewhere like Mars, it was almost like I had 6 months of just breathing of like, oh yeah, like this is a completely different pace. I can just relax a minute and that's good for me to just regroup again. So if it ever tips over to that point, like put yourself first, and it's really important that you're well so that you can help others in a better way.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Charlotte?
I think for me, I'd say it sounds very fluffy and HR-like, but you have to do something where you feel truly happy to work in. And I know, again, when you go from your younger to where we are now, you have to stay in a company that if your values align, and that does take some work and some journey to go there. So again, don't beat yourself up, don't be too hard on yourself when you're kind of working out what's right and what's wrong for you. But also I think it's good just again to think about the employee journey and any sort of touch point you have, try to make the best impression on them. And again, as you said, Zoe, you can't please everybody, but if you please some people, then you've made a good job out of doing that. And then there's other people where you even have a challenge, you might have a conflict, and then when you walk away from that with a positive outcome, again, that's quite satisfaction to go, yeah, do you know what, we've clashed, but then we've come to some kind of resolution together. And sometimes it's just having that satisfaction for me. I like to be in a place where I'm constantly growing in my role in the company. So having those opportunities, having the freedom, that is so important, I think, especially with younger people. Being micromanaged is not the best thing, and that can apply to any role. People should be able to act how they want to act within their role and be given the idea to have, at the end of the day, I think you can give ideas, you might have a few silly ones in there, but they should be heard, you should be understood and appreciated. So I think as a HR person, a HR professional, even that term, isn't it? It's people now. It's, I wonder what it's going to be like in the next 10 years, 20 years, how we're going to rename ourselves. But in working with people, I would say just to follow your instincts and not know that, along the lines, everyone will make a mistake and it's okay. I think sometimes HR are put into that sort of pedestal where they can't make mistakes, and then they're the first ones to kind of get accused at. And we're human too, I say it all the time. I'm human. Again, I say I like to think of myself as the cool HR. I don't think HR will ever be cool, but I like to think of myself as someone that will have fun with people, and that's the main thing. You need to have fun at work. You need to enjoy work. And I remember when I had my second stage interview at work, and Laura made me a coffee, and she was like, on Sundays I never get Sunday blues, and I was like, this is great, this is what you want to hear. She said this is going to be her forever job. And I think when you mix with certain people and certain employees, and they're telling you how positive they are about the company, it's just that all aligns with the gut feelings for me that this is the right job for me.
Yeah. Well, and that's a super positive way to finish. So thank you both so much for sharing all of that insight. It's been really, really interesting, and I've really enjoyed chatting it through with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
We'll see everybody next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the HRD Talks podcast. Hopefully you found the discussion helpful. If so, please follow us on your podcast provider to be notified of future episodes, and share with friends and colleagues. For more information on the podcast, please visit actons.co.uk/the HRD Talks.